Are we born who we are, or do we become that person because of the world around us? It's one of humanity's oldest questions, nature versus nurture. Our identities, our choices, even our destinies. Are they shaped by the raw material of our biology, or by the circumstances, traumas, and lessons life throws at us? As historian Daniel Feller puts it, Jackson was a tangle of contradictions, a fiery patriot and a bitter partisan, a nationalist who waged war on institutions he believed threatened the Republic, a man driven by a vision of the country, but just as often by personal vendettas. His policies reflected the ambitions and anxieties of the frontier, and his presidency remains one of the most polarizing in American history. Some see him as a champion of the common man, others as a tyrant in waiting, America's Caesar. And maybe both are true, because Andrew Jackson wasn't born into power or prestige. He was the first president born in what was then American wilderness, a patch of contested backcountry between North and South Carolina, where land was cheap, life was violent, and nothing came easy. He lacked the presidential pedigree of John Quincy Adams. He inherited no wealth, no Ivy League connections. He was just an orphaned boy, scraped raw by war, loss, and survival. It was a beginning not unlike that of his country. But despite his ragged beginnings, or perhaps because of them, Jackson became President of the United States. He was a general who inspired fierce loyalty and fear, a man who helped forge the modern presidency even as he broke the political order that came before him, a populist who claimed to speak for the people even as he silenced many of his detractors, a slaveholder who rallied against elites, a man who earned and embraced the name Jackass for his followers, transforming mockery into a powerful movement. Was Jackson born to become the man he was? Was the violence, the ambition, the charisma in his blood from the beginning? Or was he forged in the fires of poverty, war, humiliation, and revenge? Whether you see him as a hero or a villain likely depends on how you answer that question. From staring down British officers as a boy, to dueling opponents to the death, from marrying into wealth, to riding raw populism into the White House, Jackson's life is a case study in the collision of personal psychology and national destiny. Was he a product of the brutal environment that demanded the toughness of an old hickory tree? Or did something deeper drive his choices? His pride? His rage? His relentless will? General, Indian fighter, slaveholder, war hero. The first president to survive an assassination attempt. The first to transform political insult into a populist brand. In this series, we'll journey through Jackson's world, from the smoky cabins of Waxhaw to the bloody fields of Horseshoe Bend, from the parlors of Tennessee's elite to the hallowed halls of Washington, D.C. We'll confront his triumphs and his terrors, and we'll ask the question that haunted the 19th century, still echoing today. Did Andrew Jackson shape America, or did America create Andrew Jackson? You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon America's 7th president, Andrew Jackson. Episode number 1, Orphan of the Revolution. To understand Andrew Jackson, we have to start before his birth, before the War for Independence, even before the backcountry became a battlefield. We begin across the Atlantic. Jackson's parents were part of a migration that would reshape the American colonies, the Scots-Irish diaspora. Not Irish in the way we often think today. The Scots-Irish, more accurately Ulster Scots, were Protestant settlers of Scottish descent who had lived in Northern Ireland for generations. Their journey to America was driven by a complex mix of pushes and pulls. In Ireland, the pressures grew heavier with each passing year. Economic hardship squeezed tenant farmers, rising rents left little land to work, and crop failures threatened starvation. Add religious marginalization, as Presbyterians, the Scots-Irish were viewed with suspicion by both the Anglican establishment and Irish Catholics, and leaving became less an option than a necessity. America, by contrast, offered something radical: land, liberty, and distance from the old hierarchies. The British colonies in North America wanted settlers willing to push into the interior, clear forests, and raise families on the edge of the known world. The promise of land ownership, a dream denied in Ireland, often outweighed the dangers of the Atlantic crossing. Starting in the early 1700s, tens of thousands made the journey. By the time Jackson's parents, Andrew and Elizabeth Hutchinson Jackson, arrived in the 1760s, the Scots-Irish had already begun shaping the character of the American frontier. But they didn't head for Boston, New York, or Philadelphia. They went inland, deep inland, settling in the hills and valleys of western Pennsylvania, Virginia, the Carolinas, and eventually Tennessee and Kentucky. Why? Partly because the land was cheap, but also because the frontier suited their temperament. These were people used to hard lives and harder land. They built log cabins, carved farms from rocky soil, and relied on tight kinship networks for survival. And when danger came, from the British Crown or native nations defending their lands, they were often the first to fight. The Jacksons settled in the Waxhaws, a remote and disputed borderland between North and South Carolina. There, in 1764, in a small cabin, Andrew Jackson was born, just weeks after his father died in a logging accident. What happened next became one of the stranger tales to survive from that rough frontier community. Andrew Jackson Sr., husband and father of 2 boys with another child on the way, was placed on a wagon to be taken to the Presbyterian church for burial. But the men escorting the boy didn't go straight there. Instead, they stopped at several homesteads along the way, each offering a round of peach brandy, a local favorite. By the time they reached the creek, the men were so drunk they lost control of the wagon. Jackson's coffin rolled into the water. In their stupor, they couldn't find the body. Hours later, miraculously, they recovered it, and the burial finally proceeded as planned. The story lived on. In the borderlands, where folklore runs deep, it became part of local legend, remembered in plays and tales as a glimpse into the wild, improvised nature of frontier life. It's almost too absurd to believe, but like much of Jackson's world, it was brutal, unpredictable, and deeply human. Sadly, he would never know his father, and by the time he turned 15, he would lose nearly everyone else in his life. The year the Jacksons crossed the Atlantic, Parliament passed 2 acts that would ignite fires across the American colonies: the Quartering Act and the Stamp Act. These weren't just policies, they were provocations. The Quartering Act of 1765 required colonial governments to house and supply British soldiers, even in private homes and inns. To the colonists, it wasn't protection from foreign enemies, it was occupation. A standing army imposed to police their own citizens. Even more inflammatory was the Stamp Act, the first direct tax ever levied on the colonies by Parliament. It mandated that nearly every piece of paper, from legal documents and newspapers to playing cards, carry a revenue stamp purchased from London. There was no colonial representation in the body that passed it. To British officials, the taxes were reasonable. The Empire had just fought a costly global war, the 7 Years' War, known in the colonies as the French and Indian War. and now expected the colonies to pay their fair share. But to many colonists, the Stamp Act felt like a fundamental violation of rights they believed were theirs as Englishmen. It wasn't just about money, it was about power and who held it. Resistance erupted, boycotts, protests, the birth of new organizations like the Sons of Liberty. Mobs hanged tax collectors in effigy and stormed the homes of British officials. Opposition to taxation quickly became a challenge to Parliament's authority, and by extension, to the empire itself. Tensions only escalated. More taxes, more soldiers, more blood spilled, from the Boston Massacre in 1770 to the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Parliament responded with the Coercive Acts, laws so harsh the colonies referred to them as the Intolerable Acts. And then, in 1775, at Lexington and Concord, the first shots rang out. The American Revolution had begun. The backcountry of the Carolinas wasn't just a footnote to the Revolution. It was one of its most violent frontiers. Far from the halls of Congress in Philadelphia, and even farther from the protests of Boston, the Southern theater descended into what some historians call a civil war within a revolution. Here, there were no clean battle lines, no distant armies maneuvering in open fields. The war came by torchlight and ambush, in sudden raids and swift retribution. Patriots and loyalists lived side by side, sometimes even in the same families, until war turned neighbor against neighbor. The wax halls where the Jacksons lived became a contested zone, raided, burned, and bled over by both sides. Entire communities were uprooted, homes were burned, men were hanged or shot as traitors, often without trial. Violence wasn't just strategic, it was personal. Old grudges and local rivalries exploded under the cover of war. Revenge killings became commonplace. Civilians, including women and children, were not spared. In May of 1780, the Battle of Wax Halls seared itself into the memory of the Southern backcountry, not for its scale, but for its savagery. British cavalry commander Banastre Tarleton had earned a reputation for speed, aggression, and ruthless pursuit. But at Waxhaws, his reputation became legend and horror. American forces caught in open ground and overwhelmed by a sudden cavalry assault attempted to surrender. Some raised white flags, others dropped their weapons. What happened next, according to numerous Patriot accounts, was not a battle, but a massacre. Tarleton's men, either enraged, out of control, or following implicit orders, continued the assault. Dozens of American soldiers were cut down where they stood, many with bayonets and sabers. Survivors told men hacked to death as they begged for mercy. Some had their fingers cut off while raising their hands in surrender. Whether Tarleton ordered the slaughter or lost control of his men remains debated. But in the southern colonies, the message was clear. The British had shown their true face. Tarleton's mercy came to mean no quarter at all. No prisoners, no mercy. It became a rallying cry for patriot militias, especially in the backcountry. Retaliation followed every attack. Executions prompted ambushes. Civilians were dragged into the cycle of vengeance. The war, already brutal, had become deeply personal. Waxhaws wasn't a strategic turning point. It was a psychological one. It radicalized communities, steeled resistance, and clarified loyalties. For a boy on the verge of adolescence, watching the rules of war dissolve into butchery, the message was unforgettable. In this fight, mercy was a luxury. Survival was all that mattered. Before joining the revolutionaries, Jackson had lived in the house of another family, under an arrangement that his mother served as their domestic housekeeper. His sister later noted the effect on him. Andrew's childish recollections were of humiliating dependence and galling discomfort, his poor mother performing household drudgery in return for the miserly maintenance of herself and her children. It was the first big chip on his shoulder. Historian John Meacham observes, God and war dominated his childhood. His mother took him and his brothers to the Waxhaw Presbyterian Meeting House for services every week. Most stories about the young Jackson also paint a portrait of a child and a young man full of energy, fun, and not a little fury. Like many other children of the frontier, he was engaged in a kind of constant brawl from birth. And in Jackson's case, a brawl in which he could not stand to lose ground or points, even for a moment. His mother had hoped he would become a Presbyterian minister. Using the tiny bits of money she managed to save, she sent her youngest son to study under the clergy. That meant 3 to 4 hours every Sunday for 14 years, listening to sermons and highly formalized language that dramatized the epic battles between good and evil. The evocative language stuck. Jackson would later refer to his political enemies as Judases, regularly comparing himself to David, the lone man who slew Goliath. He claimed to his biographers that he read 3 chapters of the Bible every day. But as Meacham notes, he learned his most lasting lessons, however, not in the classroom, but in the chaos of the Revolutionary War. The entire Jackson family helped tend the wounded in the aftermath of the Battle of the Waxhaws. Their mother's Scots-Irish heritage shone through in her hatred for the British. His eldest brother, Hugh, had already joined the Patriot cause, and he died after the Battle of Stono Ferry, likely from heat exhaustion or disease, the silent killers of the poorly provisioned Continental forces. As the war escalated, Andrew and his brother Robert were drawn in as well. Teenagers now, they served as couriers for local militia units, a dangerous job riding alone through enemy-patrolled territory, relying on secret trails and sympathetic farmsteads. Andrew often recalled the Battle of the Waxhaws, thinking he had been so close to bloody Tarleton that he could have shot him. It wasn't glamorous, it was desperate, but it mattered. In the spring of 1781, both boys were captured by British forces and held in deplorable conditions. It was here during his captivity that the defining moment of Jackson's youth occurred. According to Andrew's own account, British soldiers ransacked the home. Then came an officer, confident, cruel, imperious, who singled Andrew out and ordered him to clean his boots. Jackson was just 14, but he straightened his back, looked the officer in the eye, and refused. "Sir," he said, "I am a prisoner of war and claim to be treated as such." It was a bold defiance, and it cost him dearly. Enraged, the officer raised his saber and brought it down on Jackson's head. Andrew raised his left hand to block the blow. The blade cut through, gashing his fingers and slicing into his skull. Robert was next. He too refused and was struck across the head with the officer's sword, knocked to the floor. The scene was quick and savage, but in Andrew Jackson's mind, it replayed endlessly for decades. Later in life, he recalled it vividly. "The sword point reached my head and has left a mark there, on the skull as well as on the fingers." From there, the suffering deepened. The brothers were hauled 40 miles to a prison camp in Camden, confined on the second story of a jail, surrounded by disease and Tory hostility. Andrew had been stripped of his coat and shoes, left barefoot and feverish in a dank cell, watching the war rage beyond the walls. The experience only intensified his obsession with warfare. He later recalled cutting a hole in the boarded-up window with a broken razor to watch the Battle of Hobkirk's Hill. He described the thunder of cannons, the glitter of American cavalry sabers, the brief thrill of hope as Greene's forces pressed the advantage, only to watch it slip away as the British regrouped. "Never were hearts elated more than ours," Jackson wrote, "at the glitter of the American swords. How short was our joy." Smallpox spread through the jail, and Robert fell gravely ill. When news reached their mother, Elizabeth Jackson rode alone to negotiate their release in exchange for British prisoners. She succeeded, but the return trip was brutal. Robert clung to the saddle barely alive. Andrew, feverish, shoeless, weakened, trudged 45 miles home on foot. Robert died soon after. The war had claimed another brother. The slashing, defiant teenager of 1781 would grow into a man who never backed down, who treated every insult as war, and who never again assumed mercy would be given, only taken. From that moment on, Andrew Jackson became known as the brave boy of the Waxhaws. By then, Elizabeth Jackson was the last of Andrew's immediate family. Devout and self-sacrificing, she traveled to Charleston to tend to other imprisoned American soldiers held on overcrowded, disease-infested British prison ships. There, too, she fell ill, likely cholera or typhoid, and she died. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave far from home. Later on in life, Jackson claimed that his mother's last words had become the iron law of his life. According to him, they were, "In this world, you will have to make your own way. To do that, you must have friends. You can make friends by being honest, and you can keep them by being steadfast. None will respect you more than you respect yourself. Avoid quarrels as long as you can without yielding to imposition, but sustain your manhood always." By the age of 14, Andrew Jackson had lost his father, both brothers, and his mother, all casualties, directly or indirectly, of the Revolution. He was an orphan, raised by war. And in those fires, something else was forged, a deep and abiding hatred of the British, a fiery sense of honor, and a will that would never bend. Now on his own, Jackson spent some time in Charleston. According to one of his earliest biographers, Henry Lee, it was during this period that he discovered a taste for the things money could buy. He had come into some money, likely from the sale of his mother's property, but it quickly vanished at the gambling table and in the back rooms of the port city's finest tailors. That lifestyle didn't last. Jackson spent the next 3 years eking out a living by making saddles, a trade that bored him so thoroughly he decided to become a school teacher. And as someone with 20+ years of experience in the classroom, I can tell you this: it's not the job for a man like Andrew Jackson. Historian John Meacham explains. Jackson, as a child, seethed beneath the surface, for when frustrated, he would work himself into fits of rage so paralyzing that contemporaries recalled he would begin slobbering. Here was an apparently unbalanced, excitable, insecure, and defensive boy coming of age in a culture of confrontation and violence. As Jackson entered adulthood, that temper would manifest in an absurd number of duels, some of which we'll cover in later episodes. Teaching didn't pay enough to sustain the lifestyle he wanted, so he turned to studying law in North Carolina. While Americans often admire stories of self-made men, Jackson's rise from orphan to national figure was not universally celebrated, especially by the elites he hoped to join. As Meacham notes, Jackson had only a handful of years of formal education. He was the least intellectually polished president in the short history of the office. and his opponents made much of his lack of schooling. After Jackson became president, Harvard, the beating heart of New England's intellectual class, offered him an honorary degree. For John Quincy Adams, a Harvard man and Jackson's bitter rival, it was too much to stomach. He called the gesture a disgrace, describing Jackson as a barbarian who couldn't write a sentence of grammar and could hardly spell his own name. But Jackson was no stranger to insults. He had been proving men like Adams wrong for decades. Though his formal education was limited, Jackson studied law in Salisbury, North Carolina, and by the late 1780s he was admitted to the bar. Legal training at the time was less about lecture halls and more about apprenticeship, courtroom grit, and backroom study. By 1787, he became a public prosecutor on the frontier circuit, handling cases in western North Carolina, what would later become Tennessee. Journalist Rebecca Graff notes that business transactions were enforced by a solicitor or lawyer, which wasn't a job that many rushed to obtain. Those who followed this profession were usually those who had talent and ambition, but with neither wealth nor connections. Law was the perfect place for somebody with nothing to their name. It was a developing profession, a new wilderness to be shaped. Jackson brought more than legal knowledge to the job. He brought nerve. His first case in court? He challenged the opposing counsel to a duel. Not metaphorically, a real duel. He feared being made ridiculous and couldn't separate attacks in court from personal insults. The incident went nowhere, but it revealed his sense of justice. When words failed, bullets might do. It also foreshadowed the man who would later navigate the bare-knuckled world of politics with the same relentless intensity. By 1788, Jackson moved west to Nashville, a rough outpost that would one day become Nashville. Tennessee wasn't yet a state, it was a part of a shifting political frontier claimed by North Carolina, the short-lived state of Franklin, and the Southwest Territory. It would not join the Union until 1796. Even here, Jackson's ambition stood out. He carved a place for himself as a rising legal and political force, and as a man who refused to be ignored. At one local society Christmas ball, he arranged for the town's prostitutes to arrive in the middle of the festivities, scandalizing polite society. It was part insult, part prank, entirely Jackson, a reminder that class distinctions meant little unless they were earned. He was at once a rough-hewn man of the people and a man determined to rise on his own terms by his own code. Law gave him a foothold. Tennessee gave him a home. But he wasn't yet part of the elite. For that, he would need to meet his wife. In Nashville's young society, Rachel Donaldson was born to rank and privilege. Her father, Colonel John Donaldson, had co-founded the city, his fortune built on land, surveying, and enslaved labor. The Donaldsons were a founding family tied to Virginia's planter aristocracy. Among the handful of families shaping early Nashville, theirs stood near the top. Rachel was 17 when she married Louis Robards, a wealthy Kentuckian nearly 10 years her senior. The match looked perfect on paper, but paper could not capture what unfolded beneath closed doors. Their marriage was miserable. Robards was jealous, erratic, and emotionally volatile. Rachel's friends and family watched in growing alarm as the relationship unraveled. She would later describe his behavior as abusive, controlling, suspicious, and frequently cruel. Meacham notes that Jackson saw himself as a rescuer, a knight defending a wronged woman's honor. When he encountered Rachel in this painful state, he stepped into her story as if born for the role. In one now legendary exchange, Jackson confronted Robards. "If I had such a wife," Jackson said, I would not willingly bring a tear to her beautiful eyes. Robard's cold reply, well, perhaps, but she is not your wife. At least not yet. In 1790, after a particularly bitter stretch, Rachel fled to Natchez, in what was then Spanish-controlled Mississippi. Her friends had arranged the journey to give her space and safety. Jackson went with her, likely to protect her, possibly already in love. There the scandal began. Believing Robards had secured a divorce, or choosing to believe it, Jackson married Rachel in Mississippi. But the truth was more complicated. Robards had only petitioned for divorce. The process was not yet complete. For nearly 2 years, Jackson had technically been married to another man's wife. When the truth came to light, Robards finalized the divorce in 1793, citing adultery, a charge Jackson denied to his dying day. Jackson and Rachel were legally wed in Tennessee the next year. The whispers never stopped. Years later, when Jackson ran for president, the old scandal returned with brutal force. Opponents branded Rachel a bigamist, Jackson a homewrecker. The attacks cut deep, especially for Jackson, for whom honor was everything. To him, the charges weren't just political, they were personal. So what bound them together so tightly against so much? Meacham writes, what had brought them together in the first place, the drama of the abusive husband, the wronged woman, and himself as the knight defending her virtue would have appealed to Jackson's imagination. It was a role he liked to think of himself as playing. But it wasn't just fantasy. From the moment they met, Jackson fell into a feverish love, emotional, physical, protective. He was a man without family, forged in violence, and Rachel offered something he had never known: comfort, acceptance, and a home. And Rachel, in turn, found in Jackson the promise of protection and tenderness her first husband had never given her. Their love would shape and ultimately haunt the rest of his life. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.